For decades, you have been on the roller coaster of saving, deferring, investing, saving, deferring, investing over and over again for years. And you've accumulated a lot of assets in tax-deferred accounts. Now you're close to retirement, and you got to figure out, how the heck do I pull this money out to help me rock my retirement? Well, that is what we are focusing on this month on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Welcome. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. And this is the second episode in this month-long series of managing IRAs, 401ks, and Roth accounts in your retirement. And today we are going to talk about that looming tax burden, and then how do you go about developing withdrawal strategies to maximize the money that gets in your pocket and minimizes taxes. But we can't do any of that until we have that all-important disclaimer. Every day, I work with people, helping them work to rock their retirement by giving them, hopefully, sound counsel on the softer and harder side of things. But on the show, I don't give you advice. I don't know you, and I only work with clients as a fiduciary. So this is helpful hints and education. Before you make any decision, make sure you talk to your tax advisor, your legal advisor, or your financial advisor, because that's just common sense. Now, this month on the show, we get a little bit tax heavy. So it's really important that you understand that I am not a CPA, and I don't give tax advice even in my practice. I'm tax aware. So make sure you talk to a CPA on anything that you're looking at doing. With that, let's go talk about the coming tax monster. It started years ago when you made your first IRA or 401k contribution. And it's been building ever since. Constantly lurking unawares in the background and always growing. If you are near or at retirement, you probably have your IRA or your 401k listed on your net worth statement. Maybe it's worth $1 million. But is it really? Because not shown in the light of a net worth statement is the looming tax liability when you take the money out. The longer you wait, the more it grows, the bigger it will be. So when you have these IRAs and 401ks that you've been saving in for years, we like to look at the balance. This first quarter of 2019 has been nice. We've seen a nice rebound since December. But what we don't typically look at on our balance sheet is the tax liability that is associated with your IRA or your 401k. Because if you got $1 million in there, well, that's pre-tax. When you take that money out, it will be considered taxable income. So if you took all that $1 million out in 1 year, you're going to be well up into the 30+% tax bracket, meaning that $1 million is going to be worth potentially less than $700,000. So here's what the deal was back when 401ks and IRAs became available to individuals. The deal was, hey, we will give you a tax deduction today. So if you put money into a 401k or an IRA, you're going to get the tax benefit because we're not going to tax that money right now. I just put money into my retirement plan at work for 2018, and I saved $4,000 in taxes by the amount that I put into it here recently. That feels good. It's like a sugar rush. So you get the tax deduction today, and that money gets to grow tax deferred year after year after year. And that power of compounding over a long period of time can be pretty, well, powerful. But now that you've reached retirement, this pending tax liability is sitting on your balance sheet even if you don't see it. And it's our job, your job, to figure out how to be tax aware enough so you can try to minimize it by managing how you withdraw the money out of these tax deferred accounts. So that's really the big issue. We've had this joyous rush of tax deferral and tax-free growth or tax deferred growth forever. Now we got to figure out how do we get all this money out? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But most of us don't acknowledge this tax liability that's actually sitting there. And historically speaking, we are in one of the lowest tax bracket schemes that we've seen in the last 50 years. So how do we take advantage of that to maximize the money that gets in our pocket? So that's what we're going to explore in our practical planning segment. And the reason we need to do this is because if we're ham-handed about this and take out money in a ham-handed way, a good example would be when someone is in early retirement, that's typically the time when they're thinking about relocating and potentially spending more money on a house or buying that RV for potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars or buying toys, improving their current home, all sorts of things that are sort of abnormal, extraordinary expenses. And very little thought is put into how they're actually going to get the money to do that. I've had instances where, we'll just take the money out of the IRA because we're over 59 and a half now. And they take out $50, $60, $100,000 from their pre-tax account to fund this extraordinary purchase. And that coupled with whatever income sources quickly drive them up the tax brackets much more than they expected. If we look at the tax brackets for 2019, and we'll look at married filing jointly, but you can pull it up. It's interesting how they're designed because you have a 10% bracket, which is 0 to 19,400 in income. So anything between 0 and 19,400 is taxed at 10%. And then you have a small increase from 10 to 12% for incrementals above 19,400, going all the way to $78,950. So if you have after adjusted gross income, basically, after all the adjustments, income at $78,950 or below, it's going to be taxed at 12%. But if you make adjusted gross income above $78,950, it goes from 12% to 22%. That is an 83% increase in your tax rate. And any incremental dollar that you realize as income above that 79,000 roughly range is going to be taxed at a rate that is 83% higher than the 12% tax rate. And then that tax bracket, the 22% tax bracket, tops out at 168,000 and odd dollars. But then we have just another slight increase from 22% to 24%. So not that onerous. And then from 24%, the next bracket goes up to the 32%. For a lot of us, when we retire, we are going to be in a lower tax bracket, at least initially, depending on pensions and things like that. And we want to make sure that we're aware of these brackets as we decide how we're going to realize income. In retirement, we have more control than we probably ever had in controlling what is realized as income because we're managing what's being taken out of 401ks, what's being taken out of IRAs or Roth accounts, as well as how much, if at all, do we work. So it's important to be much more tax aware than we are otherwise. Everybody thinks about levers in our life that could improve our situation. And a lot of times the focus is always on, I just need to find a better investment strategy. I need that process, or I need that passive income, something that's going to improve or juice my returns, which in many ways is a loser's game. But we ignore the tax bracket management and how we create a withdrawal strategy for a few reasons. One is it's nowhere near as fun as talking investment theory or the latest economic report. And markets are fun. Tax code, tax brackets are not. And I am raising my hand to this along with a lot of people. It gives me tired head, but the power, as far as a lever in your life that might be able to have impact, it's one of the bigger ones or could be one of the bigger ones, especially when we're talking about withdrawal strategy. So we can tame this beast. We can't make it go away, but anything we can do to manage our brackets in retirement will reduce that looming tax liability that's sitting on our balance sheet, even if we don't see it. So let's go talk about some general strategies to tame the beast. So before we get started on withdrawal strategies, I want to make a correction/clarification. And I want to give a shout out to Bill B on Twitter for tweeting me on this subject because it sounded like it wasn't clear or I misstated this when it comes to withdrawals and required minimum distribution. So I want to thank you, Bill, for telling me so I can make sure we clarify this. So when you are taking your required minimum distribution and you have multiple IRAs, individual retirement accounts, you can look at the value of all of those together and take your required minimum distribution based on the total from one account. So you can do that, but you cannot include an old 401k that you've not moved to an IRA or multiple old 401ks. You can't include that in that aggregate total. If you have a 401k or multiple 401ks that you've left in place and you have required minimum distributions, you have to calculate and take the RMD from each individual 401k separately. You can't aggregate them in any way. And I either misstated or I was not clear, and Bill pointed that out, and I want to make sure we are clear. So thanks, Bill. So when you're entering retirement and we're talking about how are we going to pay for retirement, and we covered that, I believe, in January, well, we have three sources. Main sources of capital to pay for are rockin' life in retirement. We're going to have social capital, so that's Social Security, pensions, things like that. We're going to have human capital. That could be income or deferred compensation that's paying out. We have control over how much we work in pre-retirement and realize income that way. But whatever's not covered by our social capital or our human capital is going to have to come from our financial capital, which is your money. And those are generally in three different buckets. They're going to be in your taxable investments, monies that you've already paid taxes on. They're going to be from your tax-deferred assets, your IRAs, your 401ks, or your tax-free assets, your Roth IRAs or Roth 401ks. And so there has to be a scheme for how you pull money from those three buckets, assuming you have those three buckets. That's one reason why we talk about having those three buckets, so you have more flexibility when you're trying to figure this out. And some of the common ways that people do this or plan for it is drain one first. So that, the typical series of draining that I see is you spend all of your after-tax assets first. You spend all of those because you're not going to realize income in any way. And once you've spent all of your taxable assets, then you spend all of your tax-deferred assets, and then you spend all of your tax-free assets. The whole idea being that you're deferring taxes as long as you can, and you're letting the tax-free assets hopefully grow as long as possible. This is a very common way of doing it. Another way that you see people drain one first is they do their taxable, and then they do their tax-free, their Roth, and then they do their tax-deferred with the idea of deferring the tax liability all at once. So this is a little bit of a ham-handed way of doing it. And typically in software, there's going to be some assumption in which way it drains first. Although most financial planning software can model taking a little bit from each, it's not very robust. So a lot of this stuff ends up being spreadsheet based because most software isn't going to be robust enough to manage taking from different buckets dynamically. I'm sure we're going to get there. Another way of creating a strategy is to do a split. You take a little bit of your taxable assets, a little bit of your tax-deferred assets, and then maybe even a little bit of your, God forbid, tax-free assets. And you do that by looking at the tax brackets, like we've talked about, and saying, okay, I want to try to stay, usually it's trying to, if you're able, stay between the 12 and the 22% tax bracket range. So if I can stay within that 12% tax bracket range by mixing where I'm drawing money from after-tax assets and pre-tax assets, then you're not going to have that 83% bump in tax rate for the incremental of dollars above that. Now, that is the second way, the more nuanced way to do it. It just takes work. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last way, if you don't need the assets, there's this concept of filling up the buckets. And we'll get into this next week when we talk about Roth conversions, of taking IRA pre-tax money and moving it to Roth accounts, tax-free money, and doing that strategically so you can try to minimize the overall tax burden. But the typical theme I hear from people is, I want to defer my tax bill as long as possible. And we can get really ham-handed about that. And so we drain all of our after-tax assets, which feels good because we're not paying taxes. But then we have what's called like the tax bump. You got a bump. Because once you drain all your after-tax assets, now you got to go to your IRAs and you still need the same money. So all of a sudden your tax bill goes up significantly because now every incremental dollar you need, you're going to have to realize taxable income. So we call that the tax bump. We don't want to have a tax bump. We want to try to manage it year by year so we can smooth it out and minimize that tax liability. Where I see this happen most with clients is with doctors or executives that have very robust income and pre-tax benefits, and they end up having all of their savings or the vast majority of their savings in pre-tax assets. And then when they get to retirement, they go through their after-tax assets really quickly, and they're taking out large sums of money that move them up into the 24% tax bracket pretty quickly, and they don't have any options because all they have are money in pre-tax accounts. It's a good problem to have, but they're left with very few or no options because of how they built their balance sheet. And then once required minimum distributions kick in, now you're being forced to take money out systematically, whether you want to or not. So, and a lot of this exercise is happening because we know required minimum distributions are looming out there. Because when you hit 70 and a half, the IRS is going to require you to take money out of your IRAs based on the life table that they update every year. And I think this year, if you're 70 and a half, you're required to take out, it's about 3.6% of the value of your pre-tax assets. And that percentage will grow every single year because their view is, one, they want the tax revenue. Two, this was meant for retirement, so you need to start taking it out. So they base it on your life expectancy. So the more dynamic you can be in your withdrawal strategy, not only can you help manage your tax bracket and take advantage of it a little bit, but you can start to maybe minimize what those required minimum distributions are going to be, because once they kick in, you really don't have a choice because the penalty is so huge. So that's one big consideration as you build this strategy. Another one is your IRAs and when you decide to take Social Security. Now, if you withdraw from an IRA, that does not reduce your Social Security benefit if you take Social Security prior to your full retirement age. Because if you take Social Security prior to your full retirement age, the IRS says, hey, if you earn a certain amount, we're going to lower your benefit because you're earning too much, and we'll give it back to you later over 15 years or so. Well, when you withdraw from an IRA and you're 63 and you've already decided to take Social Security, it's not going to reduce that benefit. But when you withdraw from an IRA, what it can do is it can make your Social Security taxable. Because if you earn over a certain amount, $32,000, I think, for 2019 as a couple, $25,000 as a single payer. If you earn less than $32,000, your Social Security is not going to be taxed. But if you start to earn over $32,000, starts off that 50% of Social Security would be taxable, and then that can go up to 85% of your Social Security because of withdrawals from your IRA. So that is a consideration in how you develop the strategy, is managing the taxability of Social Security. So you can see how complicated this can get. And if it's not complicated enough, now we have the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and the subsidies for health care prior to Medicare. And this is something that I'm working at getting up to speed on, because this is pretty complicated when you start to factor all these things together. Because the Affordable Care Act, so let's say you retire early, you don't have a corporate benefit for health care, but you need some health care, so you go to the Affordable Care Act, your exchange in whatever state that you're in. Well, they're going to look at the income that you have, and based off of the income, decide whether you're paying full boat or getting some subsidy from the government to help you pay for healthcare. And those subsidies are based off of what's called the full poverty level. So if you are above, from an income perspective, 400% of what they consider the full poverty level, you're not going to receive any subsidy to help you pay for your health care. So if you're sitting there and you're 60 or 62 and you need health insurance and you're going to the Affordable Care Act, they're going to look at your income, and IRA distributions are going to count towards this, and see where you're at to determine what subsidy you get for healthcare. So for 2019 coverage, the upper income cap for a single person is about $48,560. So if you have realized income above that, you're not going to get any subsidy for healthcare. And for a couple, it's $100,400 for a family of four. I don't know what it is for a family of two. So if you are able to manage how you realize income because you have saved in taxable, tax-free, tax-deferred buckets, and you're not being ham-handed in how you withdraw money, it could be a substantial savings on your health care as well. This stuff gets complicated. And they base this number, the ACA does, as far as my understanding, and if CPAs out there tell me I misstate, let me know. It's based on your modified adjusted gross income, which will include IRA and 401ks withdrawals, including conversions, is my understanding. A Roth distribution is not counted for income for the calculation of modified adjusted gross income, so you can see how having Roth assets can be a real benefit. Which brings me to a different point. The general idea is that we don't touch the Roth. Very rarely do I see people taking distributions from their Roth IRAs because it's tax-free and we want it to grow. And I think the decision needs to be made based on a couple things. Number one is, what is the money in the Roth for? Is it for your use? If monies are for your use in your lifetime, taking strategic withdrawals from all three buckets, after tax, tax deferred, and Roth, may make sense because it may be able to help you on the front end save a decent amount of money on your tax rate, on ACA premiums for healthcare, on taxability of Social Security. So just simply making the assumption that you never touch the Roth because that's what everybody says, it's worth analyzing it and making an informed decision. And it may still be you never touch it. That's fine, but make the decision intentionally because it could potentially be a benefit to you in this crazy calculation of withdrawal strategies. Now, if these monies, if you're overfunded for retirement, and you know that you're going to have multi-generational wealth and that you want to have IRAs and stretch IRAs and things going on to your family. By the way, there's some interesting legislation going on with that we'll touch on here, I think next week, which is a little scary for this part of it. Then if this is truly multi-generational money, then you'll say the Roth is meant for your kids. Then great. Don't touch it and maybe invest it a little bit more aggressively because the timeline is expanded. But you want to decide what is this money for because that may give you some options. So what are some quick things you can do to start to frame in how you develop your withdrawal strategy? Number one, know your income sources. Know your social capital, your human capital, and your financial capital, and identify where you have control over any of those because that may be of value to you later on. Number two is know your planned spending. Sounds simple, but know the sequence, especially early on, of what kind of spending you're going to be doing in early retirement and plan for those lump sum expenses. A lot of times that happen in early retirement, buying the RV, upgrading your home, buying the toys. Plan how you pay for those, whether you pay for them through cash flow just prior to retirement. Maybe you finance them with the intent of paying them off, but you spread out how you realize income to be able to pay them off rather than just taking that $100,000 or $200,000 out of your IRA. So you want to pre-plan for those lump sum things. So those are the triggers that you really want to watch out for. And then start to model how to find tax equilibrium. And this ends up being a year-by-year exercise. You plan for 5 years and you sort of model how it might work. but it tends to be a year by year. You look at mid-year or third quarter, you start to look at where you think you're going to be sitting from a modified adjusted gross income perspective. And you model out whether you should do a strategic Roth conversion or whether you should draw more from one account or the other. And you end up having to do it year by year, but don't worry, you're not going to get it right. Give yourself some grace. You just try to be aware and get the easy money, we'll call it, by being aware. So it just takes intentionality. This can be really complicated. If you want to go down the geek hole and really model this out, go for it. But at least get the easy money by not being ham-handed about it. Once you figure this stuff out at whatever level you're comfortable with, then you can go into where do I place my investment assets in terms of do I have my bonds and my IRAs or what goes into the Roth and things like that. And then, as in everything, you iterate and you stay agile and you make sure that you have flexibility each year. That way, you're not just stuck with one source that you have to take the money out of. So we'll be diving into this more in the Rock Retirement Club, but this is hopefully a good baseline for you to start thinking a little bit more dynamically about this so you can minimize the tax bite in retirement. Well, let's go get happy. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab, and I am all by myself talking to you about how to get happy. Nicole, she's recovering from a hangover from her butterbeer Harry Potter experience with her family. So she had a blast, maybe had a little bit too much butterbeer. We'll have to ask her next week. So as many of you know, because I've gotten a lot of comments and prayers and well wishes, so thank you for that. My wife recently had back surgery, pretty major, and I've been acting as caregiver and exercising those muscles. But what made me happy was being in the hospital for a day and a half with her. I slept in the hospital the night that she was there. And what made me happy, now how could there be happy here, right? I was blown away by the great caring people in the hospital. The night nurse, the day nurse, the occupational therapist, physical therapist, everybody that came and visited were attentive. And what I mean by that, they weren't just going through the motions in their job. They were eye to eye, taking their time and being slow. And yes, it's their job. I know that. But we all have jobs, but there was human caring there. And that is just awesome. And we try to emulate that in the show and in our practice. You know, we're human and we're trying to connect with people and help people. But it was just awesome to see because, you know, they're dealing with people that are in pain and sometimes emotionally at their worst, whether it's the family member sitting there or the patient themselves. So I just want to give a shout out and say how happy that made me that there were such caring people to take care of my wife and me when I was stressed out sitting there. So remember that and maybe acknowledge somebody that you notice that is caring and give them a shout out. There's a lot of people out there that are.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a 7-day goal to take a little baby step to rocking retirement. So in the next 7 days, I want you to outline how you're going to withdraw money within the first 2 to 3 years. If you're close to retirement, or even if you're in retirement and you have 2 or 3 years ahead of you that you're trying to plan out, you can go all spreadsheet crazy. You're welcome to it. But you can also just get a pad of paper, look at the sources of your human capital, your social capital, and your financial capital, and map out and see if you can incrementally save some money on taxes by using some intentionality. So that's your goal for the next 7 days. So get to it. The other day I was asked by someone about how do I do the show and serve clients and everything else. I don't want people to think I'm killing myself. And we don't talk about it a lot, but we have an amazing team, and this is a team effort. We have obviously Nicole, we have Janine, we have Tracy, we have Monkey Dog, we have Brandy. It's about teamwork. And, although I'm the one that gets to talk with you every week, and I'm the one that is seen it's not really about me. Ultimately, it's about you. We are all here to help you rock retirement. And everything that we do, we try to make it about a virtuous circle where doing the show informs me. I can't tell you how much I've learned from you over the years. So I appreciate all the well wishes. And I want to publicly appreciate everybody that does so much work for the show, for our clients, for everything, because it's pretty amazing. So I hope you have a wonderful week and enjoy spring. It's beautiful here in Texas.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.